Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the chrisvossshow.com, the chrisvossshow.com. Hey, welcome to the podcast. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks for being here. Holy crap. It's another Chris Voss Show podcast, and we have one of the most incredible guests I've ever had on the show. Actually, he's a guy I have a huge amount of respect for. I've known him for a gazillion years, at least through the social media age. And he's brilliant. He's smart, and he's fantastically good looking. Let's put it that way. So thanks for coming to the show. Guys tuning in today, be sure to go to thecvpn.com, subscribe to the podcast we have over there. Tell your friends, neighbors, relatives, dogs, cats, pool boys, mistresses. Tell them all to tune in. It's the greatest thing ever. Or you can go to chrisvosspodcastnetwork.com. Today, we have Scott Monty of scottmonty.com. He's the executive advisor, speaker, and neoclassical strategist who is a recovering Fortune 10 executive. He advises corporate executives and boards on modernizing their culture to meet the changing needs of customers, but does it with examples of history, literature, philosophy, and poetry. Ooh. Together with his ability to trend spot, he shows teams and audiences that the key to our future is understanding timeless wisdom about human nature and focusing on integrity. Yeah, Scott was actually the first executive at Ford Motor Company to lead digital communications and social media. You just have so much on your bio there. The other great thing about Scott, I should tell you, he's an impeccable dresser, and he's a connoisseur of the bow tie. Welcome to the show, Scott. How you doing, buddy?
Thank you, Chris. I'm pleased to be here. It's good to see your shining face and to hear your mellifluous tones coming through the microphone.
Well, it's mostly the tones. I've got that radio face.
There you go.
That's why I'm a podcaster. But, Victoria's Secret keeps turning me down to do their show, but here we are.
Well, you don't have to worry because they canceled their runway show this year.
They did, and I'm out of work. So this is what I'm doing as my side. This is my side hustle, the podcast.
Excellent.
And which is good because, now I can eat those cookies and stuff and fatten myself up for, I don't know. I got to get back in shape for the Chippendales run next year, though. So there's that.
Well, there's always that famous Chris Farley Chippendale clip. If you can live up to that, you'll be fine.
I will never forget the moment I watched that on SNL live, and I was on the ground, almost having a heart attack seizure because I could not breathe. I was laughing so hard. It was that moment when you realized that you had been waiting all of your life for Patrick Swayze and Chris Farley to do that. Like you subconsciously had always wanted that to happen.
Sure.
Just didn't know it until it happened, and it crossed the lexicon of coming out in reality. And you're just like, it's the same scene as Bob Barker fighting what's his face in Happy Gilmore.
Adam.
Yeah. You never knew you wanted to see Bob Barker beat the crap out of somebody because he was so nice, but when you saw it, you were just like, that completes me. But you complete me, Scott, being on the show.
You're very kind.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Scott, that we haven't covered. I mean, I know you from social media. I got to know you very early on in social media. You were one of the early pioneers. You really helped pave the way for a lot of corporate social media divisions, departments, et cetera, and how they were doing their thing.
Well, it's very kind of you, Chris. Yeah, I mean, at Ford, we were lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. When I was approached by Ford in late 2007, it was when the company was really on the ropes. It had taken out a $26 billion, what CEO Alan Mulally liked to call a home improvement loan to help shore up the company's finances and to finance that plan and get it in place. And that was 2 years before the other two U.S. automakers just got blindsided by the carpocalypse. When it came to that time, and that's when I was there, Ford had already gotten that financing, so we were in good shape. But I joined the company in July of 2008, reasoning that by 2010, Ford would be making a comeback. And my estimation was that social media would become mainstream at that point. So you would essentially have this kind of intersection of forces at the same time that would just kind of explode, which is exactly what did happen. We didn't anticipate the whole bailout hearings thing and Ford not having to take the bailout. That was a big shot in the arm for us in terms of PR and marketing. But it gave us the ability to start telling our story to an audience that was paying attention. And back in those days, there really weren't a lot of brands on Twitter or on Facebook or elsewhere. It was corporate blogging to begin with. And we were the first to do a lot of things. We were the first brand to have a Google Plus page. Hey, remember Google Plus? We were the first car company to reveal a vehicle using Facebook. So we were pioneers in so many ways. And in turn, that kind of made me an internal consultant with the company, somebody who went from department to department, kind of sharing best practices, making sure there was alignment, making sure there was governance, and in turn, hobnobbed with the C-suite and got a lot of insights as to how the C-suite works, how a multinational a manufacturing company functions, and was able to glean a lot of insights because of that. And after doing that for about 6 years, I left and went off on my own. And as you say, started a consultancy working specifically with executives to help them get better at this stuff.
Nice. And you really, we watched your trajectory over time, and it seemed like Ford, and through you, was one of the first to really build a division, a PR social media department within a giant Fortune 100 company, if you will.
Yeah, there were a few others, a handful of others beforehand, but they didn't really hit the mark. I mean, they were just kind of doing kind of under the radar stuff, the bare minimum. And as a matter of fact, it was a colleague of mine, a guy who I had known through his time as the chief blogger at IBM, who then went on to take the role at General Motors, who encouraged me to come to Detroit. And after I got there, I think he was regretting his recommendation, because we just kind of left them in the dust after a while. Of course, we all know what happened with GM and the bailouts. But with automotive companies, it's all cyclical. They're all trading places, every year or so. And for my part, we were just so pleased to be able to share what we had learned with the rest of the world, because the idea was, let's bring society along with us. And working for an American and global icon like Ford Motor Company, a Fortune 10 company, it was a great responsibility. And I knew that Henry Ford, back when he put the moving assembly line together, when he adapted that concept for automotive manufacturing, he invited executives in that were competitors and from other industries to study how the automotive moving assembly line worked, so that everybody could put America on wheels and do the kind of manufacturing with appliances and all the rest that made America and the world really a better place. So I viewed us doing things kind of in that mold. And the thing is, with Ford Motor Company, the specter of Henry Ford still hung over us. It was a family, still is a family-run company. Henry Ford's great-grandson, Bill Ford, is the executive chairman. It's the only automaker where the founder's name is still on the logo, right? And Henry Ford, of course, is iconic, along with geniuses like Thomas Edison and Steve Jobs, these inventors and business geniuses that have really managed to change the face of the world. So that kind of gave us the ability to humanize our approach at Ford and to take a very different approach than any other automaker.
And you're right, it has a very storied history. The rising tide lifts all boats. One of the things that Henry Ford did is made it so that his employees could afford his vehicles, and a lot of different other things that he did to really advance the thing. Like you say, getting everyone in the assembly line was a huge invention for the industrialization of America and getting us to that next phase of production.
Yeah.
And, and you're right that I remember back in 2008, I had my mortgage company and a few other companies, and it was in real estate. And it was that home equity line, like you say, that was the savior of Ford, because they'd taken that out right before the crash.
Right.
And having that was the real key to their success. And I remember back in that time, the dealerships, I mean, everything came to a standstill. It was very scary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was a point where we really didn't know how the industry was going to fare. And that's why Ford had to go to Congress with GM and Chrysler was not to ask for the money, but to stand up for the industry and to say, look, these are our competitors, but they are also part of the global fabric of the supply chain. And if they go under, what does that do to the supply chain that Ford and Toyota and Volkswagen and a whole bunch of automakers rely on? You know, it was a whole ecosystem that needed to be propped up.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things about Scott is I like to talk about people when they're right in front of me. But to describe you to our listeners, I'm right here, Chris. The one of the things I love about Scott is very, what's the right word? I'm not even smart enough to say the right words. He's deep thought thinking. He's deeply thoughtful. That's the word I was going for. He's deeply thoughtful. He's very cerebral. And intellectual. And so I've always loved following him, listening to him, watching what he writes, what he says. He even has a Patreon where you can go to his Patreon. Do you have what's the URL to that Patreon, Scott?
Patreon.com/Scott Monty.
Scott Monty. And of course, you can go to his website, stepchild.com. I love following him. He's one of the thought leaders. I have a very small group of thought leaders that I listen to. I like what they say. I like how they say it, how they present their ideas and all that sort of good stuff. To me, that's the poetry of life for me. I don't get normal poetry. I went to public school, so there's that. But so let's talk today. We talked about. So I encourage people to go check him out. Go check out his Patreon, everything else. But I brought him on today because we were having a discussion on Facebook about the Sacha Baron Cohen speech that he gave in front of the Anti-Defamation League that's been going around social media. You probably saw it. It came upon me through the feed. I think in the middle of the night or late at night. I believe Daily Beast was the one who published it first. And it's a great 25-minute speech about Facebook, where things are going, conspiracy theories, regulation of social media networks and everything else. And I thought Scott would be a great person to bring on because, he and I have both seen the social media growing up. Can you call it that they grew up? It seems more childish now more than ever. But we've watched the evolution or de-evolution. Maybe we may have gone up and we're going back down the slope. So those who haven't seen the video, you can get a link on the chrisvossshow.com. You can search for the Sacha Baron Cohen speech at ADL. And if you haven't seen it, I really recommend you seeing it. But I wanted to bring Scott on to kind of collaborate with his thoughts on it, where social media is, where it's going, whether or not these companies need to be regulated. Sacha speaks pretty highly about how these companies probably need some sort of regulation, how they have kind of unbridled freedom for the most part to support racism, bigotry. Pedophilia is out of control on the internet right now. And of course, we've seen people that broadcast videos where they're killing people in live time, and it gets shared millions of times across social media. So Scott, I'll put you on the point there. What were some of your impressions that came from the speech that he gave, and what you thought about where that goes?
Just to preface it, Chris, I think I've been around the social media space for a decade and a half, and the advice that I'm seeing a lot of people give today, and look, it's sorely needed advice. It's the same stuff we were saying back in 2009 or previous to that. And why is that? It's not because it hasn't sunk in, although that's part of it, right? I think there's a couple of things happening. One is just from a pure human perspective. There's a lot of turnover, particularly at agencies where a lot of social media is practiced. A lot of brands turn over the reins to, the whole social media operation to their agencies to handle. And okay, I get that because it can be a lot of work. But for those brands that are kind of taking a hands-off approach and letting someone else run the show for them, what you're seeing is you're being victimized in terms of the high turnover rate. So your social media folks, name your agency, you're lucky if they last 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years at most. So they don't have the wealth of experience, the breadth of knowledge of watching all this stuff play out. They're not students of the history of advertising, marketing, and PR over the last 20 years. Those of us that actually have lived through it and that are not digital natives, that have had to adapt, We've seen it happen up close and personal. We've made the mistakes. We've seen others make the mistakes as well, and we've learned from those mistakes. So I think that's the first thing, is that there's this human turnover, which is natural, and it's being relied on. The
I
second
think, and it's because these companies don't take social media seriously. I see this in my relationships with PR agencies. It's like 4 to 6 months, I'm dealing with somebody new. Even worse, I'm writing about this in my book and advice to PR agencies. No one ever recovers the email and relationships that are in that person's email when they leave.
Right.
And they seem to hire a lot of chewing gum people that this isn't their career. This is their kind of like summer job.
We're just kind of treading water, waiting for the next big thing to come along.
Yeah, I mean they hire sometimes the cheapest labor they can,
Right.
with the highest turnover. And is that because they don't just give it? I mean, why is that?
Well, I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, I think social media has never been given the proper due that it should have.
Mhm.
It is, if practiced well, it's more strategic than tactical, and it can live beyond a single silo within the company. It should live beyond a single silo within the company. The whole process of digital transformation that we hear a lot of people talking about, a lot of big consultancies are working on that. Digital transformation goes across the enterprise, and so should social. That's an undergirding of digital transformation. You should be learning about what your customers are saying, improving your products, giving feedback to your legal team and your IT team, obviously customer care and all the rest. There's a way to make it part of the ecosystem rather than, hey intern, hey kid, here's a few tweets you need to put out. Because this is the other part of the thing. When and largely when social media started out, it was PR and communications agencies that were running it. Gradually, marketing got wind of it. And when the likes of Facebook and Twitter and all the rest started putting advertising onto their platforms, well, that's when marketing got to step up with the budget. And of course, he with the largest budget is going to win the departmental fight, no question. But in doing so, what's happened is social media has gone from this earned media community building kind of thing that it initially was under PR and communications, and has become more of an advertising platform. And we've seen the same thing play out that we saw on television and then on the early internet with banner ads and the likes, where it's the same model where you're just talking at people. You're shoving content in front of them. You're paying for it to get in front of them, and you're walking away for the most part. There are some brands that do some fairly good jobs at community management, but by and large, the community management that they do is putting out fires on Twitter, responding to crises, or handling customer service inquiries that come in on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. So it's become a very, kind of bifurcated thing where it's either handling complaints or pushing content, right? And when you do those two things, what's the incentive for the agency? It's to minimize, or it's to maximize the margin, right? To minimize your spend on it. Yeah, you're going to spend on media and you're going to pick up a percentage of the media buy that you get, but you also have a budget allocated for these other activities. And more we're seeing agencies, not just in social, but marketing in general, getting squeezed for their margins, and they don't have anywhere to move.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to hire the cheapest people. Of course they're going to work them hard. Of course you're going to see a lot of turnover, lather, rinse, and repeat. So this is where we are.
Yeah. And what's really sad to me is a lot of the relationships are lost. Relationships is a huge thing, I'm sure, to both you and I. And the relationships are lost. And I've literally had relationships for years with people at a PR agency or as a major company, and suddenly my emails aren't getting returned. And very rarely I'm lucky enough where there'll be a bounce back email that says, "Hey, I've left the company," but that's like super rare.
Right.
And so finally I'll just reach out and around to the company and be like, "Hey man, is Joe Smith still there? Because I was talking to him and I keep emailing him and he never answers." They're like, "Oh no, Joe Smith left." And you're like, "So let me get this straight. You had a major company pay you as a PR agency. Sometimes it's the company itself. And they built all these wonderful PR relationships inside, and this is the thing I'm talking about in my book. So, and you have all these relationships that are in that email, because that's really where most of my relationships are these days.
Oh,
Uh, and they're just gone. Like, no one recovers the email when that employee leaves. I guess no one gets the password. No one even gives a care to it. It's just tossed away.
oh,
And the thing that kills me is they're in some board meeting right now trying to figure out how they can make more money marketing when
right.
they've thrown away this whole database that's in their
That,
email, these people.
that's absolutely it. And I think what you've seen also is the whole influencer thing.
Yeah.
Um, Again, that's been handed over to marketing because it's more of a contractual relationship.
Hmm.
Yeah, now you get the history of the contract and how much you paid the influencer to do their thing. But to me, it's the difference between influencer relations and influencer marketing. And I know
Hmm.
we're kind of splitting hairs here, but again, this is the difference between PR handling it or communications handling it and marketing handling it. And
Hmm.
marketing views it very much as a transaction because that's how they bought media for years, right? And they view influencers as nothing more than a celebrity type media buy, as a sponsorship.
Hmm.
And to your point, it's those relationships that were developed that really mattered.
Yeah.
We used to have bloggers in all the time at Ford Motor Company, and I took great pride in that program and developed relationships with as many of the bloggers as I could. Our agencies were the ones that reached out to them and did all the footwork and really did the lion's share of getting them there. But when they were there, I made sure I spent time with each one of these people and built relationships on the ground. And to your point, walked away from Ford, and a lot of those relationships walked with me, and we're still in touch. We still interact online, and they still get contacted by the company, but they go, it's just not the same since you left. So
Yeah. Yeah. I followed Ford a lot because of you. And same thing with my good friend Robert Scoble. If anybody ever asked me, where should we go for, computer cloud services, I'd say Rackspace, because my friend Robert Scoble works there.
right.
Honestly, I'm a BMW fan. And I have a lot of respect for the Ford brand, but I would follow the Ford brand because you were always talking about it and posting about it, and all the fun things. One of the things I always remember you posted, I think this might have been after you left, but you posted a picture where they got a Ford Mustang on top of the Empire State Building. And I believe it was the Empire State Building, wasn't it?
Right. That's where the launch started out in 1964.
Yeah.
And on the 50th anniversary in 2014, that's where.
Yeah. That was one of those moments I'll never forget. But these are the people who lead us through things. And I do have smart PR agency employees that they follow me. They take their database with them and they just go from agency to agency and stuff. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm still in the age of where people still treat social media like a stupid stepchild. Like, you'll have somebody that's paying you to consult with them, and all of a sudden they'll be like, "Hey, Chris, we're going to cut your services. We found somebody to work for us." "Oh, really? Who?" Yeah, our nephew just graduated high school, and we're going to put him in charge of the social media account.
So typical. I know. And then they wonder why they don't get the results that they were promised or that they see from other brands. Well, if you're going to do this well, it starts with a well thought out strategy.
Yeah.
And it has to maintain its cohesion. It can't be somebody that just kind of shows up part-time or doesn't understand the broader implications to the business. There's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah,
and I
definitely.
saw somebody list out exactly like everything that a social media manager does, and to me it's a little more granular than the stuff I used to do at Ford because I was more at an executive level. But everything from art direction to coding to content creation and copywriting, and it really becomes the entire span of what marketing is today, all crammed into this little window that everybody knows of social. But it's so much more than just, hey, I got a nephew who tweets, if you're doing it right.
Yeah. It's amazing to me how many, I don't know what's going on, because like you, I grew up in the age of In Search of Excellence, Tom Peters, who helped really, build me a lot of companies with his stuff. He almost bankrupted me on some of his ideas, though. He was like 50-50. And evidently people that document things that don't actually do them aren't always right. It's kind of weird. Uh,
Figure.
but I have huge admiration for Tom, and I wouldn't be where I was today without him. But in Search of Excellence, you remember how powerful that book was, and it changed a lot of mindsets of corporate America in the customer is number one and all that sort of stuff. Now things have just really flipped. I mean, one of the things I'm talking about in my book is these bots now. These bots, what are they called? The response bots.
Yeah.
Um,
Bots and response bots and all
yeah,
that.
the ones on like Facebook and different things. They are, I mean, of all the polling I've done with them and communicating with companies, like 95% of them are garbage. You never hear from the company. It just seems to be an excuse to like be like, yeah, we'll get back to you. Yeah, we responded, so
Yeah,
we'll get back to you with a official response.
it's basically the modern day hold music,
Yeah, there you go.
but
There you
it's
go.
to a humanized voice.
Yeah,
And if you're trying to fake people out with a bot, you're not really doing it right.
yeah,
I mean, you can acknowledge that it's a chat, but there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to use technology to help you manage, your operations, okay, fine. But did you see there was, I guess it was about 2 years ago or so, maybe three, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, had a live demonstration of Google Home, or of the Google automated for business kind of thing, where he made a call to it was a hair salon or something like that, and the person on the other end of the line didn't know they were talking with a bot that was trying to set up the appointment
oh yeah,
for him,
I
and it
remember
was
that.
freaky.
Yeah,
It was really freaky, and it's like, all right, what are the ethical implications there? What's a business responsible for in terms of helping their customer, or helping the person on the other end of the line understand that they're not actually dealing with a real human being?
mhm.
Because that can go so far, and there's going to be a lot more of that, because AI and automation and all the rest, that's going to be doing a lot more in the future. What are the responsibilities? What are the ethical implications there for people that think they're dealing with another human being?
And I'd been fooled. I don't know about you, but I've been on websites and I've been fooled that I was talking to a real human being. And when I figured out it was a bot, I was not happy, especially if I was a customer.
That's the thing. That's the thing. It's what, and this comes right down to one of my great theories. One of my theories of the world is that 90% of all business problems are communications based. If only we could explain ourselves better, if we could do a better job of laying things out, we wouldn't be in the jam we're in so many times. And the example that you just gave, where you were pissed off after figuring out that you weren't dealing with a human when you thought you were, if they just explained it up front, that would have just brought your blood pressure down commensurately.
Yeah. Well, they create this maze now. I can think of my bank does that. A Bank of America, Geico is known for that. Geico has hidden their contact phone number. And I've been with Geico for like 10, 15 years or something. I just really like that lizard. I don't know why. I'm just into the lizard. I mean, the progressive chick, she's cool, but she just doesn't do it for me like the lizard. I don't know why. Maybe, I don't know. So
Brain.
I have a lizard. Is that what it is? It's my lizard brain. It's my caveman. That maybe well. I just have this contact with whatever crawled up out of the primordial soup
There
of
you
my evolution.
Well, and Chris, that's funny, because that's part of my supposition. You announced in the intro that I'm into history and literature and all the rest. The point is that the reason I keep coming back to that is because we see the same kinds of things happening, not only in business, but just in society over and over again. And we see the same mistakes being made. We see human nature just kind of playing itself out century after century. And history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme, right? And if you're ready for that, if you understand the patterns and you know exactly what human nature is up to, then you'll be able to predict what's going to happen in the future, regardless of what the platform is. Which gets us back to Sacha Baron Cohen and Mark Zuckerberg, because I think Facebook could have avoided a lot of this if Mark Zuckerberg just stayed and finished out at Harvard and worked on his psychology degree or something to understand more of human nature. And I don't think anyone whether they're from Google, Twitter, Facebook, or wherever, is an intentionally bad actor. I don't ascribe any of this to any kind of evil motive. I think it's just people that have tried to do the right thing, but really haven't been prepared for the consequences, haven't thought this through to its ultimate conclusion. The question now is, as Sacha Baron Cohen has put it, when confronted with this, when the reality now is, okay, here's what we're dealing with autocrats and propaganda and true fake news, if you get my drift there. Now that we know it's being promulgated on these sites, now what do you do about it, right? This is what's going to make the difference between what I would describe as bad actors versus just naive actors.
Yeah. And would you say it's Mark Zuckerberg's naivete as sort in his education, or is part of it the balance between that and the financial aspect of it? Like, we're a company, we have to make money, I'm beholden to shareholders. And, now it's kind of, it seems to have turned the page in the Trump era, is that he's beholden to politics, because Trump has played, and I'm not being political here, I mean, I think this has been, he's said it. I mean, they're starting to use social media as a battle axe for the conservative right, and they're demanding, hey, we need to be listened to. And he's been very angry sometimes when white nationalist sites have been kicked off of these platforms.
Yeah, I think in some ways they've been over-responsive or oversensitive on some of these things. They've wanted to go out of their way to make sure that they don't appear to be biased.
Yeah.
And I get that, especially from a communications perspective. I get it. But at any point, Mark Zuckerberg, because he controls the voting shares of that board, he could make a unilateral decision to reverse course, right? Even if it's going to take a hit for a couple of quarters, if he stands up and says, look, we are affecting 1/3 of the world's population with our platforms, between WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook and Messenger. We owe it to society to do the right thing, to pause here and really understand what the implications are, and to really take stock of what we need to do going forward. I don't think there are any easy solutions. I said a few weeks ago, well, just stop political advertising. Well, that flows over into issues-based advertising, things like climate change and
conspiracy,
domestic violence and stuff like that. You don't want to harm, players that are out there trying to do good from that perspective. But at the same time, just put a halt on paid political advertising for right now. You can figure this out. And certainly through the 2020 elections. I mean, that's really where it comes down. We're seeing this play out once again, and didn't even have to go farther back in history for this, except to 2016. When you saw the meddling in the election and what was done.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that they would be the first people that would put up and saying, we screwed this up once. We're going to take a little bit more time to figure this out. Props to Jack at Twitter for standing up and saying, we're not getting involved in this. Google has since come out and they're dialing stuff back. And of course, I'm not being a political basher here, but the conservatives on Twitter, as soon as I saw Google put out, some new standards about where you can't micro-target as much, they started pounding the table about how we're being censored, et cetera, et cetera. And this is one of the voices they have to listen to and demand. And, everyone wants a voice at the table. And the big challenge is, that was one of the other reasons I wanted to have you on the show for the intellectual input, was, people sometimes get into the whataboutism of this, of like, well, how far do you go in banning or censoring, or how far do you go in doing whatever? I liked Sacha, and I've thought about it a lot. Sacha Baron Cohen, I think, puts forth the best sort of procedures that, there's certain, and I talked about this yesterday in my podcast I pretty much did a whole podcast on the Sacha thing. I believe there are certain tenable things that we can decide are very despicable in society. In fact, we've created laws to establish that those are despicable: pedophilia, violence against people, hate crimes, racism, et cetera, et cetera. We've already decided as a society that those things are improper. So why are we allowing those things to run rampant on Facebook and social media? The genocide in Myanmar was a huge thing that you would think that Facebook would have stepped back from and gone, wow, we really need to think how we're impacting the world.
Right.
Yeah.
And he called Myanmar out in his speech specifically.
Yeah.
A couple of things that stood out to me is that, he said, one thing he said, that freedom of speech is not freedom of reach.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's one of those throwaway phrases, but when you really pick it apart, it makes a lot of sense. This automatic knee-jerk response, oh, we're being censored. No, you're not.
Yeah.
Nobody's stopping you from saying these things. I think what we want to see stopped is we want to stop the amplification of this, the needless and dangerous amplification of it. You can see some crazy guy standing on a soapbox on the corner of a street who's ranting and raving for 20 minutes as traffic goes by. Nobody's stopping him.
You've been driving by my corner, huh?
Now I know what you do on the weekends. Nobody stops somebody like that. But as soon as they go and they want to broadcast something like that, they want to take it and take that hatred and put it out there, that's when society, rightfully so, I think, has a problem with it. Mm-hmm. So it's the difference, as he says, of freedom of speech and freedom of reach.
Yeah. And I mean, I can, I got in an argument, and tomorrow I'm going to have a gentleman on who's a good debater on this, who he usually throws out a lot of whataboutisms, and he's very debating and sort of person. He runs a comedy show that's does a lot of debating over love and relationships, and he does comedy on it, so he's very funny. But he was giving me a lot of whataboutisms on Facebook when we were trying to talk about this, and I'm like, well, here's the problem with whataboutisms: is how low do you go? Do you go, well, pedophilias need to have a voice too? I mean, and maybe Hitler, maybe he did have something against the Jews, and we should just let him run. I mean, how far do you go down the wormhole, or where do you stop, or where do you decide the things are that we need to take care of? The one thing he talks about is objective fact and objective truth. And I think I assume we can all agree, maybe it's my delusion, that in this world of conspiracy theories, I mean, I've seen you talk about fascism. We've talked about fascism, I think, privately. This conspiracy theories, the dissolution of truth, the ability to make people question reality and truth. This is how fascism rises. This is how governments are overthrown, how autocrats rise, fascism works. The dear leader sort of aspect, but making people that where they don't believe what they see. I mean, the man's actually known for saying that to a group in his rally. But this isn't just his playbook. This is every autocrat's playbook in history. This
is right out of George Orwell's 1984.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
The leader instructed you not to believe the facts that were before your very eyes.
It's not what you see and think; it's what the party tells you.
That's right.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's happened. What is it? Was it 1984? And it's 2018. God, I'm getting old. Yeah. And I remember when that book came around. I remember it was 1984. You probably do, although I don't want to date you. You're clearly much younger and better shape than I am. At least you look it that way, Scott.
I'm actually 83. I have. There's a painting of me up in the attic.
What do you do? Do you inject formaldehyde into your veins or something at night? Are you on that Michael Jackson thing, cryogenic whatever thing?
Yeah, I sleep in the bariatric chamber.
There you go. Good for you, man. I need to order me up one of those. But so where do we go from here, Scott? How do we solve this problem? How do we get back the truth and objective truth and honesty, if there is ability to get back?
I know. I'll go back to
and I'm putting on this all on you, so the whole world's waiting and watching on your bated breath.
Clearly, I'm going to have to run for office after this.
I'll vote for you. You got me.
Sacha Baron Cohen said it's time for a fundamental rethink of social media and how it spreads hate and lies. And I think that's exactly right. And to me, what it's meant is spending less time online, which is difficult when you're a solo practitioner and your connection to the outside world is social media. But it means closing the computer. It means getting more active in one-to-one conversations. For me, I've doubled down on my email newsletter and Patreon, where I'm talking about more of the things that I think are important.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is reading. I think we could do with a lot more book reading. And I don't care if you get it on a Kindle or if you get it off the shelf of a library or whatever. I mean, you can see behind me, I take reading seriously. And again, this is why I think we all need to understand history a little better, because we're forgetting these things. We forget the atrocities. We forget the mistakes. We forget how leaders of the past have functioned. I think there's great leadership opportunities for us to learn from the great leaders of history and from the leaders of the pages of literature. So I think if we did a little more old-fashioned reading and reflection, right? Because everything we do online now, it's like you got to have a knee-jerk response to something. You got to be ready with a quip, an insult, or an attaboy kind of thing, and blame that on the share or the retweet button.
And this is what these social media companies that Sasha talks about are how they're manipulating us. I mean, their algorithms monitor emotion, they monitor triggers, and so they amplify that up through your systems. When it becomes a highly emotional, dramatized, they can see a lot of activities going on in something, and they push it to the top.
And it takes a great deal of self-discipline to get around this stuff. I mean, just this morning, I saw a couple of hashtags on Twitter. One was Trump cheats, and another had to do with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I think Sarah is a liar or something like that.
She hates being called a liar.
Yeah, she hates being called a liar. Well, in the I don't know if you do profanity on your show.
You can be as profane as you want. Okay. I mean,
so there's that famous scene in Liar Liar with Jim Carrey, where he's got this criminal that keeps calling him to get out of jail or get out of the jam he's in, and Jim Carrey's secretary says, Snake is on the line. He's just held up an ATM at knife point. He wants to know if you have any legal advice for him. And Jim Carrey grabs the phone. He holds it away from his from his mouth, and he screams into the phone, "Stop breaking the law, asshole!" So if you don't want to have these things kind of pointed your way, don't do the things that are responsible for them.
Yeah.
My point with seeing those hashtags like that, and last week during the impeachment hearings, there were more. It's easy to jump into the fray and add to the people that are trying to pick holes at these people. What is it going to matter at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's true.
That you get recognized with a like or a retweet. I mean, is that really going to affect your life? Versus not engaging and not giving way to that anger and hatred. It's the classic philosophy of Yoda. Right? Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to the dark side. It's simple wisdom like that. That's
it's funny. I could hear the voice when you said that too.
I don't want to force it here.
It's one of those. It's one of those voices where when you say it, you can hear Samuel Jackson saying his lines. So this reading thing.
You want to hear Morgan Freeman saying it.
Yeah. So this reading thing. On my PS4 Pro, which video game is that? Reading? Is that the? I think that's the problem you have with this generation. My mom was a teacher for 20, 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And over all those years, she was going through, here in Utah, one of the problems you had was the metro area, of course, is a city area. But the rest of Utah was cattle farming, and stuff. And they didn't get college. They didn't understand, well, you want to go to college, you can milk cows. There's nothing wrong with milking cows. But they would constantly dial back the education budget for my mom. And, sometimes I talk to my mom, she'd be like, can we refinance the house? Cause I need some more money per month. And I'm like, what do you need money for? And she goes, I'm spending about $250 a month of my own money to pay for supplies for the school. I'm like, what?
I know.
And she's like, yeah, they won't. They dial it back. They doubled our class size. I remember when they took her class size, they practically just doubled it. And she's like, I can't. And my mom loved these kids. God bless her, because I would have probably killed them all. Not really. I like kids, but I would have just quit. But it's a lot of work to be a teacher and or a parent, and neither of which I am, clearly. And so she would, just every year I'd hear about, well, the legislature took more money away and we have less to work for, and we're trying to jump through all these hoops and the regulations, and we're just trying to educate some damn kids here. And I remember her telling me, just like it was a theme over 20 years, that we are raising a generation that's going to be dumber and stupider, and she didn't mean that mean way, but just uneducated, ignorant, not aware of, they took civics out of school histories and history sometimes. What was it? Also band. I think you were a band member, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And so was I. I played trumpet, but never got. Man, that was one of those things that was never going to get me laid. But that's me personally. But no, I was in band. But a lot of those things that you learn. I mean, you look at. I mean, you're like one of my friends who was a CEO of a company who came from a literature background, and he went to college for literature and for arts, liberal arts. And, he would always talk about how much that really influenced his ability to be a good CEO. What was it? Steve Jobs, when he went to college, and the only thing he was really interested was in, what's the art of that thing called? Fonts, basically, but the art of the script or writing or whatever. And they say that was the thing that he used that really made Mac work initially, was the, the ability for people to write and document and create fonts, and and so it's interesting. What's the gun that is now at Mark Zuckerberg's head is, he's got almost 50 attorney generals now that are investigating for a monopoly.
Yeah.
So it's not just the politics of someone twittering at him from the White House. It's now AGs that are involved in the process. Google is seeing the same sort of attacks, monopoly, that are being used, I think, in a political sense. I think Twitter has definitely been under pressure. You've seen all of their CEOs, I think, begging at the White House or negotiating at the White House, trying to balance everything.
Yeah.
Do they need to just say, I don't know, we're just going to do things our way and not make everyone happy? Or, I mean, Jack seems to have done pretty well with his announcement that we're just not going to get in it. So we're out of the trap for the most part. I mean, you can sling your arrows, but you have to sling them on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I think he certainly gets the credit for being the first mover there and doing what Facebook still hasn't decided to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the jury's out as to whether they will. I've seen some pundits say, well, maybe before Thanksgiving, maybe before Christmas, whatever. Don't hold your breath. Mm-hmm. And what matters is doing the right thing because it's the right thing, not because you've been pressured by others in your industry. Mm-hmm. Whether it turns out to be the right thing operationally for Twitter remains to be seen. But I think Jack's spirit, where it's been devoid of so many other things about denouncing, fascists or hate crimes or things like that, where he's had the opportunity to step up and has not, or to create an edit function. He certainly appears to have done the right thing this time around. So we'll see how it takes. But ultimately, what you've got with Facebook is at least they're being consistent with their brand.
They're throwing elections consistently, is that what you're saying?
Pretty much. I mean, they've constantly overstepped their bounds, apologized, overstepped their bounds again, apologized some more. They've lived by apology. It's been this, apology as a strategy. And there's no trust for Facebook anymore, which is why I kind of roll my eyes and say, hey, good luck getting them to actually do anything about this. I don't know if they will. And I view it very cynically, and I'm sorry that it's come to that. I'm sorry that I have to be that cynical about it, but that's exactly what they've proven themselves to be. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of interesting, too. It almost seems like Mark Zuckerberg's attitude is he will drag us to where he wants us to go. I remember, and I'm sure you do too, years ago when he came out with the statement. I believe it was one of the Facebook 8 meetings that they Face 8 or whatever the hell it's called. And he stated that privacy is dead. And at that time, we all didn't know that our frog was boiled yet. We were kind of in denial about it. And everyone was like angry. Like, well, privacy is not dead. No, privacy is fine. Meanwhile, Edward, Snowden's going, no, it's really dead. And now we just kind of accept that. And it's kind of like he was the early prophet who got the arrows, who went, well, whatever. And I think we do live in an enlightened age, and it becomes more and more unenlightened, I guess, if you will. One of my favorite sayings that I think I changed, I don't know, I haven't done enough research to see if it's mine yet, but one of my favorite sayings is, the one thing man can learn from history is that man never learns from his history. And I like the ironicness of that, because it goes in a cyclical motion. Yeah. But getting back to truth, and it's interesting to me. There's certain, if I go onto network TV, CBS, whatever plays over the air, under FCC regulations, there are certain words that they cannot use before a certain time period. Mm-hmm. But social media has got free freaking reign as to whatever they want to put out there 24/7. And I remember the dilemma. I don't know what you've done with your children, but I remember the dilemma of my religious brother, who was just horrified to ever let his kids get anywhere near the internet, even up into their teens. I mean, you finally let them on Instagram. But I don't have children as a parent, but for me, I would share the same horrification of, like, I know what's on there and where it can go, and where these innocent minds will go, and maybe there shouldn't be, the ability for certain impressionable young minds, especially those who are wandering through that age of teenagedom, trying to find themselves. I was recently reading about some young girl who was kind of lost. She broke up with her boyfriend. She was kind of angry, and she was young, and the people who picked her up was a white nationalist group. And so for 10 years, she ran with that as a person of hate. And I guess when, she finally found Jesus or something, I don't know. But, how do we keep these impressionable young minds? Because that reach is being used for recruitment for these ugly areas of society that want to build up these people and validate, your anger and your hate and your disassociation with life, or your anger at it. And they give you that vehicle, and they give you a group of people that go, hey, you're as crazy as we are, so you're right, And
it's not just the young minds either. It's any impressionable.
Yeah. And we see that in targeting towards the old people who the old people. That was kind of rude. People who aren't as internet savvy, who are in their older ages. And of course, what we're seeing out of that is, I guess social media technically plays to everyone's prejudice when it comes down to it.
Yeah. Everybody's got a bias one way or another. Mm-hmm. And there have always been bad actors in history. Just have. I mean, I think by and large, human beings are good and kind and want to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And there's maybe 1 to 3% of humans that are just not so nice. and that's the way it's always been. And power of numbers. We've always survived because the majority wins. Well, what happens when you've got the ability to take that 1% and to amplify it so that it seems like it's 90%?
Good point.
This is where we are right now. And this is why this technology, if not checked, can be very dangerous. And again, this gets back to my earlier supposition that, did the progenitors of this technology really think through where it was going to go? If they knew human nature, if they knew the extreme potentials on either end of human nature, they could have predicted this. And, can you unring the bell? Are there things that can be put into place now that can help staunch some of this and to restrict it? Look, one would hope that with AI, with automation, that we're able to nip some of this stuff in the bud. But again, there are nuances in the human language, nuances in how things are taken. it's going to get really messy before it actually.
And I think Sacha Baron Cohen. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think Sacha Baron Cohen has a good point. These guys got plenty of money, and they've got the smartest people that are creating AI and the thing. But their attitude right now, especially what Mark Zuckerberg has been trying to push, like it is Georgia's speech, is that we're just going to try and give everyone voices, and of course, not having to hire 50 million moderators helps the bottom line. And I think more and more, what really came out of me in the Sasha thing was more and more realizing that we're the mouse in the cheese maze, and that their algorithms are now designed to control us. I came up through the YouTube era where if I put up a great video, I could get it trending. And it was just the quality of the video, what I did, what I said, and have it being topical, et cetera, et cetera. And then things changed. The same thing with Twitter and Facebook and other things. I can have an influence and control them. And then it came to where the algorithms came in. And then it became more manipulative on their site. Now, when you go to trending on YouTube, a lot of it's technically paid advertisements or paid promotions. And pushing their thing. And so it kind of went from this democratization of where all of us could decide that, hey, this government's bad, or hey, this is a really great video or music, to where now, like you say, and especially not just with algorithms, but with bots, you can take that 1% of the darkest part of the internet and turn it into the loudest voices in the room.
Yeah.
And the most influential. And they can, because of that reach, they can find the most weakest of minds that will go, hey, that sounds like a great boat. I'll get on. It looks great because it's the loudest voice in the room. So therefore, it must have some sort of authority of I don't know, of being right, I suppose.
Well, when the incentive is to simply drive eyeballs because it's an advertising-driven marketplace, you've got to wonder whether we've completely turned this thing on its head, and if there's an opportunity to right the ship. Because here's the thing. In a study last year, people said they'd be willing to give up all their personal data to a brand for $150. $150 to give up all of your PII to a brand. I don't think that's right by any stretch of the imagination, but some people want to put a price on anything.
See, I would go for 200.
You're a fine, discerning gentleman.
Yes, I value myself highly. And maybe 250, 225.
So here's the thing. At the same time, we're seeing people being unwilling to pay for news. They just expect that it's always free. Mm-hmm. So between getting your news for free and getting all of your social networking for free, we've painted ourselves into a corner where it's just the expectation that all of this just flows freely. Well, guess what? And I think Scott Galloway said this earlier. Advertising is a tax that the poor pay. If you can't afford to have a paid service, whether it's a newspaper or ad-free Hulu or whatever it is, the advertising is the tax you pay. Mm-hmm. We need to come up with a model. And I know Jimmy Wales has just done this with a new social network, the WT social network. Where there's an option for people who want to pay $100 a year to join this social network that'll never have ads and will never do anything with your private information. Mm-hmm. We need to move toward a model like that, where like the utilities you pay for, like your phone, like mm-hmm. your electricity, like your cable or your streaming services, it's a form of a utility, and we need to treat it and regulate it that way. At the same time, we need to think about our local news. Certainly the national news is doing well, but the local news is really where it matters.
And they're really struggling too.
Well, a lot of them are, yeah. But the big ones, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, they're doing okay. I know even the LA Times is struggling.
Yeah, a lot of the local ones are shutting down in some of the smaller cities.
That's the thing, yeah. The local news is where we need more attention and where it really matters to people, right? Mm-hmm. Where they're having this dialogue at the local level, where they're interested in, their schools and their town council races and different things like that. We need to get people interested and being being civic-minded once again. And that goes part and parcel with helping them understand history, get interested in reading. In some ways, if the entire electrical grid just blew up, and it was some kind of apocalyptic kind of film, it might get pretty bad at first, but we actually might come out of it a lot better.
It'd be like the Purge. People would be murdering each other for Wi-Fi. I don't know if you do that as a disciplinary thing to your kids, but I love this age where you can just discipline your kids by you don't have to spank them or anything anymore. You just take away the Wi-Fi and you've ended their world.
That's exactly.
I'll do whatever you say, Dad. So I was going to ask you about that new social site. One of the problems we have, and one of the things that I was thinking through with the Social Baron speech, was this trap that we're in with Facebook, where all of our data is there, and we have 10, 15 years worth of data there. You've got Grandma, Auntie M, and Auntie M. Wow, there's a reference from a long time ago. You've got Grandma and Dorothy and and everybody on there, and it's almost a trap in and of itself, or a maze that we're stuck in, that it's really hard to. I remember when Robert Scoble, my good friend, was trying to get his wife, Mary Ann Scoble, who's just wonderful, and he's like trying to get her to come to Google Plus, and she wouldn't come over. And he's like, "Why won't you come over?" And she's like, "Because Grandma and Annie and everybody's here on Facebook." And so trying to extricate ourselves from, Facebook and go, we're just going to take our ball and leave, is a whole lot harder. And I think Mark knows that, and the board of directors at Facebook. I think they know that.
And that's the conundrum. And it reminded me of Dr. Seuss's The Lorax, where there was this phrase toward the end, where the Lorax said, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's ever going to get better. No. It's not. And somebody's got to make the first move. Somebody's got to tear themselves away and start to bring other people along. And you know what? It may be that Facebook just dies out as their population ages, that people will start to go to some other platform.
But most of the people joining are pretty young, so it may take us so long.
I know. What are we in for until then?
I don't know. I'm probably not long for this life. So maybe it's 20 years, maybe. So, I mean, what do we do? And when I talked to you yesterday, my friend, I'm not sure if you were friends with Mike Elgin. But Mike was really big on social media and Google Plus. And Mike finally just declared, I'm taking my ball and going home. Mm-hmm. And is that a Cartman reference? Screw you guys, I'm leaving. And he left Facebook. And so I pondered, well, what do we have to do? Do we have to just walk off of Facebook one day like we talked about? Or is maybe there a way to use the power of their platform against them? Like, a lot of my posts aren't so much emotional as they are educational. Like, I'm trying to share the word. I'm trying to pass the word around. Someone on my Facebook post mentioned to me the other day, they go, I'm getting more news from Chris than I'm getting from CNN, which is fine with me. And so, and sometimes I throw in a little emotion because, that's how you got to drive it to get things. But, I'm also using it as a way to stand in the mob of holding up the sign. To me, it's the virtual mob of the march holding up the sign, that if enough people say we're sick as hell and we're not going to take it anymore, maybe Zuckerberg might change. But of course, the grand irony is I'm posting content on something that's being used against me. So, on one hand, Mark's sitting there going, he ate the cheese. Cha-ching. And then on the other hand, demanding change. So do we strike in front of the place that's giving us poor employment, trying to get it change, or do we go get a job someplace else?
I think the only language they understand at this point is eyeballs, attention, and money. Mm-hmm. They don't understand the plaintiff plea. They certainly don't give a lot of fuel to the good stuff. Like we've mentioned before, the stuff that sells, the stuff that gains eyeballs is the controversial stuff, is the hatred. It's the stuff that angers people. Mm-hmm. And that's a sad state of human nature, but there we are.
Yeah. And it recently came out that they've got, there's a few white nationalist groups still operating on Facebook. And I remember, I haven't gone in it for a long time, but I used to pop in it just to do a dipstick. And I remember going to the deplorables groups. And I don't think up until that time I'd ever seen so much racism, xenophobia, hate. Um, I mean, I was just astounded as to how, I think we all kind of lived in this utopia during Obama that we all came towards a societal agreement. I guess there were some people that were being pushed into PC that didn't want to be, that held that in the closet. But, to wake up one day and see that on the Facebook, or like most of us, when we saw those torches being carried in Charlottesville, and like, where the hell did this come from?
Right.
I remember a lot of my friends when Trump was first elected, the day he took office, the Southern Law Poverty Center started tracking the hate. We started seeing the postings, and my gay friends had their cars vandalized. And one of my friends, who ironically was a Muslim from the country that we went and saved in Iraq, and I always forget the name of it. But it was the country that Iraq invaded, and we went in and took the country back. We fought a war of these guys. She was literally thrown out of an Uber cab and called the N-word and other negativities usually attributed towards African Americans. But she was Muslim from Eastern country. She wasn't even. But that was how ugly the racism was that had been held in this closet that got thrust forward. And we've seen an outpouring. The Southern Poverty Law Centers kept track of all this hate, the rise of these hate groups, fortunately we've seen some of it cut back. The Richard Spencers of the world, they've been kicked off of platforms. They've more and more had their voices taken away. But it seems like Facebook seems to be the one platform that kind of wants to let it roll and still play both sides.
Well, let's not forget that the commander-in-chief is tweeting that his opposition is human scum over on Twitter, which is a phrase that Hitler and Stalin have used in the past, particularly with respect to Jews. That doesn't bode too well. So, and now you get into a debate about, well, what's appropriate to allow the President of the United States to say, because it is of national interest or newsworthy, versus, where do you draw the line there and say he's actually promulgating hate speech and is promoting this kind of behavior that you just outlined. We've seen the rise of for the past 3 years. So again, there's no easy answer here. It's not cut and dried. But we need to really think about this seriously and have this debate. And maybe Twitter does need to hold some people to account. There was a thing where Twitter threatened to clamp down on hate speech, and a lot of the GOP in that instance said, well, if you do that, then a lot of our content is going to get wiped away. And again, I go back to my Jim Carrey thing, then don't speak don't use hate speech. Don't speak like a white nationalist or whatever it is. I mean,
and this is how genocide begins. This is how fascism begins. The dehumanization of each other, regardless of race, regardless of religion, whatever it was. In Hitler's case, it was the Jews. And technically, actually, in Hitler's case, it was the Aryan race. So it was pretty much anyone who wasn't, white, light skin color and blonde hair, which was weird because he didn't have any of that. But he wasn't spectacular in look. I mean, seriously, you look at Hitler and you're like, yeah, you're not the genetic top of the heap there, buddy, little man. But that's how these things work. I guess that's the grand irony of the ugliness of it. But it's this dehumanization of each other, this part where we don't see each other as Americans. And I mean, you and I, people who studied history and have an education, even though I didn't go to college, but have an education of seeing the world and how it works. It's interesting to me. I grew up reading a lot of the books. I knew I was dumb and I knew I didn't have a good education. I grew up poor. But I knew I needed to educate myself. So I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of Kennedy books. I read a lot of books about the Marshall Plan and how we worked so hard and spent so much money and did things to try and spread capitalism around the world. And now you just see all that disappearing and just being thrown away. And you're like, the blood of patriots were put on the beaches of Normandy for the spread of capitalism. And now right now he's talking about pulling out of NATO. You can imagine if that happens. But So do we need to leave social media? Do we all need to get up and leave? Or do we need to, is there some way we can use the power of their amplification to speak up and come together as in unity and say, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore and you're going to change your thing? Do we have to pass new laws that give them, I mean, they have less regulations than the MPAA for movies. You have to regulate video games with a adult rating. There are certain websites that I can't get onto without claiming I'm 18. You know, we have the Pop podcast. There's a lot of different vendors that we invite to come on the Pop Business podcast, talk about investing in marijuana and the business of it, if you will. And so a lot of their websites I go on to, you know, I have to say that I'm 18. Yet on Facebook, I can, you know, anybody can get on there. Technically, there's supposed to be a rule you can't have an account according to federal standards of, you know, unless you're 13 years or older. But we recently saw that TikTok just let that thing run and let everybody on the platform, and they end up with like, what was it, $500,000 fine or something like that. But do we just need to create tougher laws to regulate these guys?
Well, I think they definitely need to be regulated in some form, and they're not going to self-regulate. You know, that was pretty clear from from what we've seen, and certainly what Sacha Baron Cohen said in his speech. They won't self-regulate, so they need to be pushed. I think that's part of it. I think if you know, folks have always been good about starting a movement and trying to get things to catch on. It just needs to be focused. You know, I think right now it's too big and broad and not granular enough for people to understand. We need to take one thing at a time, you know, and figure out what within that needs addressing. And the other thing is, if we can just start to commit to personally to being less spiteful, cynical, snarky online, and trying to do things that are kind and uplifting and motivating other people and encouraging other people. You know, it starts one person at a time. And I know it sounds kind of corny, and I know it sounds like it may take a long time as a result, but we have to start somewhere. You know, the Lorax knew.
Yeah. And it begins with us. I mean, it takes a village, but it begins with us. I mean, everybody has to make a decision. It harkens back to some of the things I liked that Bobby Kennedy said in his speech in South Africa, where he talked about each of us has an impact on life, and we create a ripple of effect that can tear down the greatest walls of adversity. It's a wonderful quote, and I can't remember exactly off the top of my head in my old age, but I used to have it down. But each of us will be judged, and we'll ultimately judge ourselves on the difference we make in the world and the difference we make in society. I remember one time I had somebody trolling just some real ugly stuff that was kind of out of left field. Like a lot of times when people call me an asshole on social media, I'm like, so what's your point? But but he was trolling me with something that was like, you're just like, is that really your choice of trolling? Like, I can give you some other things to troll me with. And I remember him making the statement because I was popping back at him and just saying, really? Are you sure that's what you want to run with? And he goes, yeah, this is what Twitter is. It's the troll platform. That's what we all do. We troll on here. And so I had a little back and forth with him. I think it's saved somewhere. And I said to him, I says, no, that's not the purpose of Twitter and social media. We're not supposed to sit and be snarky and just troll each other and be ugly. There's a huge educational platform here, a way to build great relationships, get to know people better, become smarter in of ourselves. And it was really interesting in their conversation we had on Twitter. He changed and he went, wow, oh, okay, I never thought of the bigger picture. And thanks for sharing that with me. And it turned from a negative, ugly trolling situation to hopefully we were both the better for it. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it goes with you know, changing the world one step at a time, one handshake at a time, and one hug at a time, I suppose.
You know, just as a kind of an IRL example, if I may, occasionally I may have made a stupid turn in my car, or cut somebody off accidentally. I think we all have, and you feel bad about it. Well, sometimes you get somebody that, you know, rolls up next to you at the stoplight and rolls down their window and starts screaming at you, you know, of what an idiot you were. And in those situations, I always go, what? And I make them repeat it louder. And I go, what? And they do it again. And I go, and then they go off, and they've either gotten the anger out of their system, or they feel foolish for exactly what they've done. And I haven't done anything to get engaged in it. I just kind of highlight the idiocy that's going on here, the trolling. And just like you go, are you sure you really want to say that?
My dad used to have this interesting way of dealing with people that would flip out and do stuff like that. And he had kind of a soft tone, and he had a manner about him that was very Christ-like. I'm not saying my dad was Jesus Christ in any way, shape, or form, but in his older age, he kind of started to embellish that. And a lot of people would compare him to that. But he would have this thing where he'd go up and he'd put his hand on their shoulder, and he'd be like, "Someone must have really hurt you, or something really happened to you. What made you this way? What was it?" And he would have people break down and cry. They'd go from being angry and yelling and screaming, and they would break down and cry.
That's exactly it. I think of Mr. Rogers in cases, one of the kindest people out there, who exhibits patience and empathy. And to say to somebody who's angry like that, to say, you must be really hurting right now, acknowledging that and getting them to open up a little bit. I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah, and I went through the same phase. I remember when my dog was going through cancer for about 1.5 years, and I was doing hospice care, I was raging on social media. You probably saw that bit about Trump. And of course, I was pounding the table long before a lot of people were pounding the table, because I've known people like Trump that are business people. I've known them personally as friends. And I kind of looked at them as kind of like handicap cases where I just went, "You're just stupid. I'm just going to love you because you have a problem." But eventually I had to cut those people out of my life because they're just toxic. But, for a long time I was hurting and angry over my dog. And so I was ranting on social media about Trump and everything. And fortunately now I was right, but there were a lot of times where I was a little too jacked up emotionally, and it was because something else was eating at me, and I was dealing with it. And I think we all have that, but I think sometimes we see these platforms as, like you say, they're the platforms for being snarky and smart and smacking each other around, and in a lot of ways they're kind of like, I used to read about road rage and why people got so angry in the cars, because I have that problem too. And we feel that we're insulated in our vehicle. Like if you or I met on the street, we wouldn't say some of the ugly things that, people say to each other on social media face to face, probably because one of us would end up beating the other senseless. Probably you, because you're in better shape than me. You beating me, that is. I don't know why I'm inciting that Scott Monty would ever lead to violence, but I don't think you ever would. You're much too cerebral for that. But you know what I mean. So, but no, I mean, we wouldn't say things face to face. And in the car, we're known for doing that, being very ugly. But I think social media gives us that same vehicle where we can be very ugly because we're insulated and protected, that we would never say to another human being face to face.
That's exactly right.
Although I don't know, I'm a real jerk in person, I hear. That's just me.
But you think about it. I mean, we all have a backstory. Mm-hmm. We have something. And whether it's a trauma we experienced in childhood, whether it's the way we were raised, whether it's something we experienced this morning, somebody might have gotten fired or spilled coffee on themselves on the commute on the way to work, or yelled at their kid, or whatever. You don't know what somebody's backstory is when they come to a situation like that. And good old Fred Rogers, right? And I'll quote from The World According to Fred Rogers right here. I just found this quote this morning. He said, there's a quote he likes from The Little Prince, and it's, "What's essential is invisible to the eyes." Mm-hmm. You can't see everything, and there's so much going on within every single human being that it's dangerous to make assumptions like that. Mm-hmm. And so isn't it better to just show up with kindness and assuming that people have the best of intentions rather than assuming that they're trying, like they're out to get you or that they've got negative purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes people, that's been one of the hardest things that I've had to learn, is that we're all on a journey. And some people are on their journey and I'm on my journey, and my trajectory is nowhere near perfect. And most people are going through the same thing. Maybe we're kind of delving into psychology here. Maybe Twitter should change the question of what's happening that prompts you to put in your status to who made you feel this way, or what did your mom do to you as a child?
Or tell me something good about yourself.
Hey, there's a good. I love that, Scott. That's awesome. Tell me something positive. Tell me something good. And maybe that's what we need. We need to spread is more of the goodness in the world. On one hand, I've been challenged by that whole concept, though. Do I need to post more puppy pictures and feel good memes and all that kind of crap, or do we need to look the dragon in the mouth? One of my business acumens for my companies were, I always want to look the dragon in the mouth, and I always want to know how dark it could get and how we can deal with the business aspects of decisions we made, so that we know what the issues are going to be before they cross our desk, fully on fire. You want to look around and go, where should we put the smoke alarm detectors first before the fire burns your house down? And so it's really hard for me, do I put up feel good whatevers? And I do have friends that they're in the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil mode, where they have trouble dealing with the hatred in politics and stuff like that. And you're like, well, is that going to contribute to a better world? Putting up puppy tail photos and, all that sort of good stuff? Or do we need to look at what's happening? I think a lot about what happened with the Jews. Some of my friends from Germany that come over here and visit fairly regularly, they've told me about the stepping stones that are in Germany, and the reminders that they do in their schools that force people to learn about what the Nazis did, how they did it, what led to it, all the things that are supposed to be designed to keep them from walking back down that path again, because they did start 2 world wars. You got to keep your eye on those guys. I love my German friends. But, they talk about all these different reminders they had to keep them from going down that way. So they spend a lot of time looking the dragon in the eye. But ironically, there now is a huge amount of rise of white nationalism in Germany. And these are places where if you do the Heil Hitler symbol, you'll go to jail. They'll arrest you, even if you're an American citizen. They have certain laws that there are certain things and symbols you can't use. But even then, with that sort of prevention going on, they're giving rise to hate and bigotry again.
It's crazy. Great. Well, you think we've solved all the problems of the world, Chris?
No, man. We just created more. So I don't know. Damn it, Scott. I was expecting you to have the answers. Oh, I'm just kidding. I was like, Scott will know. But anyway, I've loved having you on, Scott, and you're always welcome to be on the show. I honestly mean that. You're one of, 5 respected, maybe 10. Sorry, you're going down the list now. No, you're not. You're in the top 5. I'm just saying that there might be more. But you're one of the people that I've always respected, the way they think and how they think it and how they promote it and communicate it. You're one of those people that I go, I wish I was smart as they are. So I love the stuff you're putting out at Patreon. I kind of like the idea. I've tried Patreon several times to launch my sort of thing along the same veins, and I just never have either put my shoulder into it or gotten the traction. So I'm glad you are. The Lorax thing you posted was brilliant.
Thank you.
It might be a little cerebral above my brain. I was trying to read it, and it's Dr. Seuss format, so I can't even put my head around that. Tells you where my education level is. But you're doing wonderful things, and I just appreciate everything you do, Scott. And I'm glad you finally came on the show. Give us some of your plugs so people can go check them out and all that good stuff.
Thanks, Chris. Well, you're very kind in your praise, and I
don't tell anyone, you'll ruin my image.
Oh, come on. Yeah. You're doing the kindness thing, one guest at a time. Folks can find me at scottmonty.com. That's the easiest way to go about it. You can sign up for the Timeless and Timely newsletter there. And I am Scott Monty on all of the major social networks. So feel free to connect with me however you like.
Awesome sauce. Thanks for being on the show, Scott. Thanks to my audience for tuning in. Hopefully you guys learned a whole mess of stuff. And if you didn't, maybe you have more questions, and that's good. A whole lot more ideas you can work with. One of the most important things you can learn in life is more questions. And if you get a chance, look up Bobby Kennedy's speech in South Africa. It's really moving. It talks about each of us can make a difference in this world and create ripples of hope that can tear down the highest walls of oppression, resistance, and hate. And maybe go listen to some John Lennon. Imagine. That's one of my favorite songs to listen to. I think if anything I would want in the world is to have that song bring all of humanity together as one, and we can all just be human beings to each other, as opposed to all this, subjective crap that we have to put up with. So there's that. Go to thecbpn.com and Chris Voss Podcast Network.com. You can subscribe to all 8 podcasts there. We love you as an audience. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.